When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had found my dream home. The lawns were trimmed to perfection. The houses lined up neatly like they'd been copied and pasted from a catalog, and the streets were quiet, almost too quiet. It was the kind of neighborhood where you could hear your neighbor sneeze through the hedges, and everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Of course, that also meant the HOA reigned supreme. Their rules weren't just rules. They were commandments etched into stone. Grass no longer than 3 inches. Trash cans hidden from street view at all times. Christmas lights removed by January 2nd without fail. At first, I figured these regulations were simply the cost of maintaining the peace. But I was about to learn that the HOA wasn't a faceless organization. No, the HOA had a face, and it was the permanently scowling face of Karen. Karen wasn't just on the HOA board, she was the board. Even though there were technically other members, nobody ever spoke up when she barked orders. She had the kind of presence that bulldozed over reason. Her bob-cut hair, oversized sunglasses, and permanently pursed lips gave her the appearance of a woman who had been born angry. The first time I officially met her, she appeared on my doorstep with a clipboard tucked under her arm. She didn't introduce herself, didn't smile, didn't even offer a welcome to the neighborhood. Instead, she peered over her glasses at me and said, "Your garbage bin is 3 inches too far from the curb. Fix it." I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. That set the tone for our relationship from the beginning. For months, she nitpicked everything. The color of my mailbox, the way my lawnmower left lines in the grass, even the flowers I planted in the front yard. But nothing compared to the day she decided I owned a dog. Now, let me be crystal clear. I don't have a dog. I've never had a dog in this house. At the time, I barely had the energy to keep a plant alive, let alone care for a pet. But Karen, in her infinite wisdom, became convinced that I was hiding a 4-legged fugitive inside my home. It all started when I was out back working on my deck. I heard barking echoing from somewhere in the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual. Half the people on the block had pets. A German Shepherd lived 2 houses down, a yappy terrier next door, and across the street was a golden retriever that barked at its own reflection. I thought nothing of it. But Karen showed up later that evening, tapping on my door with that same clipboard in hand. "We need to talk," she announced, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. I opened the door, weary but polite. "What's the issue this time?" She pursed her lips tighter. "Don't play coy. The HOA has received multiple reports that you own a dog. You know very well pets are not allowed in this subdivision." I blinked at her, genuinely stunned. "A dog? I don't have a dog. Don't lie to me." She narrowed her eyes like she was interrogating a suspect. "I heard it barking myself this afternoon." I almost laughed then and there. "Karen, there are at least 5 dogs on this street. Are you sure you weren't hearing one of those?" She scoffed. "Don't deflect. I know what I heard." Her confidence was so absolute, so unshakable, that for a moment I wondered if I had somehow blacked out and adopted a dog without realizing it. "Look, you're welcome to come inside and check," I offered, gesturing to my empty living room. "No dog, no toys, no food bowls. Nothing." She sniffed, like she was smelling phantom fur in the air. "That won't be necessary. I already have enough evidence." Evidence. That word sent a chill down my spine. "What kind of evidence?" I asked. She held up her clipboard triumphantly. "Witness statements." I leaned forward to glance at the paper. Sure enough, she had written down the names of 2 neighbors who had apparently confirmed the existence of my imaginary pet. At that point, my amusement began outweighing my annoyance. "So let me get this straight. You're planning to fine me, or whatever it is you do, over a dog that doesn't exist, based on the word of people who probably heard the retriever across the street." Karen's expression hardened. "If you continue to deny it, I'll have no choice but to escalate." I crossed my arms. "Escalate how?" She smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant one. "Legal action." I nearly choked. "You're going to sue me?" "For a dog I don't own." "That's correct." And that's when I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a nervous giggle. A full, belly-aching laugh that shook my shoulders and made it hard to breathe. The absurdity of it all was too much. Karen's face turned red as a stop sign. You think this is funny, she snapped. I think it's hilarious, I admitted, wiping tears from my eyes. You're about to waste time and money chasing after a figment of your imagination. She didn't take that well. In fact, she stormed off, muttering about calling in reinforcements. I figured that meant she was going to bother more neighbors for fake testimony. What I didn't expect was for her to escalate things even faster, by calling the police. I thought I had seen it all when it came to Karen's antics. I thought the clipboard was her ultimate weapon. I was wrong. Not 10 minutes after she stormed off my porch, I heard the distant wail of a siren. At first, I figured it was unrelated. Our street was usually so quiet that the loudest thing we heard was a lawnmower or the occasional UPS truck. But then the flashing lights turned onto my block and parked directly in front of my house. 2 police officers stepped out of the cruiser, one tall and lean with a serious expression, the other stockier with an air of mild annoyance, like he was already regretting whatever nonsense had brought him there. Behind them, like a general leading her troops, stood Karen. Arms crossed, chin tilted upward, radiating smug satisfaction as though she had single-handedly orchestrated a sting operation. I opened the door before they could knock. "Evening, officers," I said, keeping my voice calm. "What seems to be the problem?" The taller one cleared his throat. "We received a call from a member of the neighborhood association regarding a violation of community ordinances." Karen piped up before he could finish. "He has a dog. An illegal dog. I heard it barking and I have witnesses." I stared at her, then back at the officers. "With all due respect, gentlemen, this is ridiculous. I don't own a dog." The stockier officer pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly exhausted already. "Sir, do you mind if we step inside and take a quick look? Just to settle this." I almost burst out laughing again, but I managed to contain myself. "By all means. Please come in. But don't expect to find anything besides furniture and a few houseplants." Karen tried to follow them inside, but I held up a hand. "Not you." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me. This is my home," I reminded her. "The officers can come in because they asked politely." "You?" "No." Her face flushed crimson. She looked like a tea kettle about to blow, but the officers stepped inside before she could explode. They did a thorough sweep. Kitchen, living room, bedrooms, even the garage. I stood in the hallway with my arms crossed, suppressing a grin as I listened to the silence. No barking. No scratching at doors. No jingling of dog tags. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the squeak of their shoes on the hardwood. Finally, the tall officer returned. "Sir, as far as we can tell, there's no dog here." I nodded. "Exactly what I've been saying." Karen barged past me at that moment, unable to restrain herself any longer. "You must have missed it. He's hiding it somewhere. Maybe the attic, or the basement, or—" "I don't have a basement," I interrupted. "Then the backyard," she cried. The stockier officer sighed. "Ma'am, we checked thoroughly. There's no sign of a dog on this property." Karen's eyes darted around, desperate for an explanation. She was like a gambler who had just lost everything but refused to leave the table. "He got rid of it. He must have hidden it right before you arrived." I couldn't hold back anymore. I laughed loud and long. "So now I've somehow trained a phantom dog to vanish into thin air? That's impressive even for me." The tall officer gave me a look somewhere between pity and amusement, like he'd seen this kind of nonsense before. The stocky one wasn't as patient. He turned to Karen, his voice firm. "Ma'am, making false reports wastes police resources. If there's no dog, there's no violation. We can't keep responding to calls like this." Karen gasped like he'd slapped her. "False reports? Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm calling you mistaken," he replied carefully. "But if you keep calling us for something that doesn't exist, there could be consequences." She opened her mouth to argue, but he raised a hand to cut her off. "That's the end of it. No dog, no case. Good night." The officers left, clearly eager to move on to something more important, literally anything more important than this. I stood in my doorway, watching Karen fume on the sidewalk as the cruiser drove away. Her arms flailed as she muttered angrily to herself, like she was plotting world domination. Finally, she spun on her heel and pointed a trembling finger at me. You might have fooled them tonight, but I know the truth. I'll prove it, even if it takes me months." I gave her a mock salute. "Good luck with that." She stomped away, her heels clicking furiously on the pavement, and disappeared into her house. I shut the door, shaking my head in disbelief. The entire situation felt like a sitcom gone off the rails. Being accused of harboring a non-existent dog, having police sweep my house because of it, it was surreal. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She'd double down, triple down, drag everyone else in the neighborhood into her delusion if she had to. And I was right, because the lawsuit came next. I thought the police visit would have been enough to humiliate Karen into dropping her nonsense. Most people, after having officers confirm they were wrong, would quietly retreat and save face. But Karen wasn't most people. About a week later, I found a thick envelope stuffed in my mailbox. At first, I assumed it was one of those HOA newsletters filled with passive-aggressive reminders about trash cans or lawn care. But when I tore it open, I realized it was something much worse. Legal documents. Karen was suing me. The claim? Violation of HOA bylaws. Unauthorized ownership of a canine. I sat on my porch steps, rereading the words, half convinced I'd somehow wandered into a parallel universe where logic no longer applied. She had actually gone through the trouble of hiring a lawyer, or more likely, she had bullied some unfortunate attorney into filing paperwork on her behalf. The cherry on top? She demanded not only that I remove the dog immediately, but also that I pay fines, emotional damages, and her legal costs, all over a dog that didn't exist. I burst out laughing so hard my neighbor 2 houses down peeked over his fence to check if I was okay. "Karen finally did it, huh?" he said, smirking knowingly. "You heard about this?" I asked. "Everyone's heard about it," he replied. "She's been going door to door telling people you're harboring some secret like it's a crime drama." I shook my head in disbelief. "And people actually believe her?" He chuckled. "Believe her? No. But they're too scared to tell her she's wrong. It's easier to nod and shut the door than to deal with her wrath." That explained the witness statements she had gathered earlier. Half the neighborhood probably signed them just to get her off their porch. The following week, I showed up at the courthouse for the preliminary hearing. I didn't even bother hiring a lawyer at first. I figured common sense alone would make the case collapse. How could anyone prove ownership of something that didn't exist? But then I saw Karen strut into the courtroom, heels clicking on the tile like she owned the place. She had binders clutched to her chest, papers sticking out in every direction, and a smug grin plastered on her face. Her lawyer, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, trailed behind her looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. When the judge entered, we all rose. Karen shot me a glare across the room like we were dueling rivals in a western. I almost laughed again, but I bit my tongue. The judge sat down, scanned the paperwork, and raised an eyebrow. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly. The plaintiff," he glanced at Karen, "is suing the defendant for owning a dog in violation of HOA regulations." Karen nodded vigorously. "Yes, Your Honor. He has been hiding it and lying about it for months." The judge turned to me. "And you, sir?" I stood calmly. "I don't own a dog. I never have." The judge tapped his pen on the desk. "Do you have evidence, Ms. Karen?" She flipped open her binder, producing photos of my house, blurry recordings of barking that could have been from any yard, and the so-called witness statements. She presented them like they were the smoking gun. "This is undeniable proof," she declared triumphantly. The judge flipped through the pile, unimpressed. "These are photographs of a house. They do not show a dog." Karen bristled. "Well, of course not. He hides it whenever someone comes close. And these recordings," the judge continued, "do not establish the location of the sound. They could have been made anywhere in the neighborhood." Karen's jaw tightened. "But the witnesses." The judge cut her off. "The witnesses claim they heard barking. Again, that doesn't prove the existence of a dog in his house specifically." I finally spoke up, unable to resist. "Your Honor, if it helps, I invite the court to come inspect my home at any time. There are no food bowls, no toys, no fur, no leash, nothing that even remotely suggests I have a pet. Unless invisible dogs are suddenly a thing, This entire case is based on her imagination. A muffled laugh echoed from the gallery. Even Karen's young lawyer bit his lip, clearly fighting back a smirk. Karen slammed her fist on the table. He's mocking me. Don't you see how guilty he is? The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. Ms. Karen, I see no credible evidence that the defendant owns a dog. This case is dangerously close to being dismissed as frivolous. Her eyes went wide. But he's lying. Do you have any tangible proof? The judge asked one final time. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Her binder, her recordings, her witness signatures, all of it crumbled under the weight of logic. I'll tell you what, the judge said firmly. We're scheduling a formal inspection. Neutral officers of the court will visit the defendant's home. If they find evidence of a dog, this case continues. If they do not, the case will be dismissed, and we'll consider sanctions for wasting the court's time. Understood. Karen swallowed hard but nodded. I nodded too, smiling politely. That's perfectly fine with me, Your Honor. The gavel came down, and the hearing ended. As I left the courtroom, I passed Karen in the hallway. She glared at me, her face twisted with fury. Enjoy your victory while you can, she hissed. I know the truth. You can't hide it forever. I grinned. Karen, the only thing hiding around here is your common sense. She stormed off, binder clutched to her chest like a life raft. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen would rather drag the entire neighborhood into chaos than admit she'd been wrong. And after court officials came to my home and found nothing, she was going to lose it completely. The day of the inspection came sooner than I expected. 2 court-appointed officers arrived at my doorstep early in the morning, clipboards in hand. They were polite, professional, and, most importantly, unbiased. Unlike Karen, they weren't fueled by gossip, ego, or a desperate need to control the neighborhood. They were simply there to do a job. Karen, of course, had invited herself to the event. She marched up behind them as though she were leading the charge, clutching her infamous binder like it contained the lost secrets of the universe. This is it, she whispered to one of the officers, eyes glittering with excitement. You're going to expose him today. The officer gave her a flat look, then turned to me. Sir, with your permission, we'd like to conduct a thorough walkthrough of the premises. I smiled warmly. Be my guest. And I promise, you won't find a single tail wag or paw print. Karen tried to follow them inside, but I stopped her with the same firm hand gesture I'd used before. Still no entry for you. Her jaw tightened. I have every right to be here. This is my case. Actually, ma'am, one of the officers interjected, our job is to conduct this inspection independently. You'll need to wait outside. The look on Karen's face was priceless, somewhere between disbelief and fury. Her lips moved as though she were chewing on nails. She huffed but reluctantly stayed on the porch, pacing like a caged tiger while the officers entered my home. Inside, I guided them room by room. They checked the living room, bedrooms, closets, even the attic crawl space. They looked under couches, opened cabinets, and peeked behind curtains. They found nothing because, of course, there was nothing to find. One officer made notes on his clipboard. No evidence of food bowls, toys, bedding, or other pet-related items. The other nodded. No hair, no scratches, no odors. This house is clean. I chuckled. Unless I've trained a ghost dog, I think we can all agree this is a waste of time. When we finished, the officers thanked me for my cooperation and stepped outside to deliver their findings to Karen. I followed them to the porch, arms crossed, curious to see how she'd react. The taller officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, we conducted a thorough search. There is no evidence of a dog on the property. Karen froze, her binder slipping slightly in her grip. What do you mean, no evidence? You must have missed something. The officer shook his head. We checked everywhere. If there was a dog living here, we'd have found signs of it. Her face turned crimson. She flipped open her binder, frantically waving photos and papers. But look at these. He has to have one. I've heard it. I've seen shadows. Ma'am, the second officer interrupted firmly. With all due respect, this case is closed. There is no dog. I couldn't resist. I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Told you so." That was the final straw. Karen's composure snapped like a dry twig. She let out a shrill scream that startled everyone within earshot. Neighbors peeked out from their blinds and cracked open doors to see what the commotion was about. "You're all in on it," she shrieked, pointing at the officers, at me, even at the gawking neighbors. "This is a conspiracy. He's bribed you, all of you, to hide the truth." I burst out laughing again. "Karen, if I had that kind of money, I'd have bought an actual dog by now, just to spite you." The neighbors chuckled. A few even applauded. For the first time, I realized the entire block had grown just as tired of Karen's antics as I had. The taller officer frowned. "Ma'am, I strongly suggest you calm down." But Karen didn't calm down. She stomped her feet like a child denied a toy, binder pages flying into the air as she ranted. "You're all against me. You think you can make me look like a fool, but I know he has a dog." Her voice echoed down the street, shrill and desperate. At that point, the stockier officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, this behavior is unacceptable. If you continue, we'll have to escort you away." Karen froze, her wild eyes darting between the officers, me, and the gathering crowd of neighbors. She realized she was losing, not just the case, but her power, her credibility, her imagined authority. And then, in one last act of desperation, she lunged toward my front door, screaming, "I'll find it myself." Before she could step inside, the officers grabbed her by the arms and pulled her back. The scene was surreal, Karen kicking and flailing like a toddler mid-tantrum while her binder lay scattered across my lawn. "Let me go. He's hiding it." "I'll prove it," she shrieked, but her words fell flat. The neighbors were openly laughing now, recording videos with their phones. The officers, patience gone, finally cuffed her hands behind her back. "You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and making repeated false reports," one of them told her. Karen's eyes bulged. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." The stockier officer shook his head. "Lady, right now you're just another person disturbing the peace." They guided her toward the cruiser as she howled protests, her voice fading as the car door slammed shut. The street erupted in applause. Neighbors stepped out of their houses, some clapping, some cheering, some simply shaking their heads in relief. For the first time since moving in, I felt a sense of camaraderie with them. We had all suffered under Karen's reign of pettiness, and now, finally, she had toppled herself. One neighbor called out, "So, when are you getting a real dog?" I laughed, raising my hands in mock surrender. "Honestly, after this, I'm tempted." The crowd laughed with me, and for once, the neighborhood felt light, free, and almost normal. Later, when I sat back on my porch with a cold drink, I replayed the day's events in my head. Karen's meltdown, the officers' calm professionalism, the way the neighbors rallied together. It was like the grand finale of a show I hadn't signed up to star in. And best of all, Karen's lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice. The judge even ordered her to pay court fees for wasting everyone's time. In the end, Karen's obsession with my imaginary dog had only managed to dig her own grave. And me? I didn't just win. I earned the best revenge possible. Every time I saw her empty house afterward, because yes, she eventually moved out, I smiled, knowing she had barked up the wrong tree one too many times.